The silver locket caught the passing streetlights, a small beacon of authenticity in a world that had valued appearance over substance for far too long. The road ahead would be difficult: legal proceedings, professional recalibration, emotional healing. But for the first time in years, we were traveling it together, guided by values that had survived corruption, ambition, and the seductive pull of privilege. And in that moment, despite everything still to be faced, I felt a profound sense of gratitude that the essential Michael, the compassionate, principled man his father and I had raised, had found his way home. The weeks following Michael's dramatic stand at Westfield Manor unfolded with the relentless intensity of a hurricane. Federal prosecutors moved swiftly, leveraging Michael's testimony and the evidence from the mysterious USB drive to build an airtight case against Judge Winters, Judith, and their network of conspirators. Vanessa, faced with mounting evidence of her involvement, negotiated a plea deal that minimized her potential prison time in exchange for comprehensive testimony against her parents and their associates. Media coverage was merciless. The story had everything journalists dream of: corruption in high places, wealthy families imploding, the tarnishing of seemingly pristine reputations. For days, I couldn't turn on the television or open a newspaper without seeing the Winters family name emblazoned across headlines, each new revelation more damning than the last. Michael weathered the storm with a quiet dignity that reminded me powerfully of Richard. He provided his testimony to investigators without dramatics or self-justification, accepting responsibility for his own blindness while offering context for how he had been manipulated. When reporters ambushed him outside his apartment building or the federal courthouse, he responded with measured courtesy rather than defensive anger, neither seeking sympathy nor deflecting blame. "I made choices I'm not proud of," he told one persistent journalist who had cornered him after a particularly grueling day of depositions. "I prioritized professional advancement over ethical clarity. That was my failure, regardless of the influences around me. Now I'm trying to make amends by ensuring the full truth comes to light." His law firm placed him on administrative leave while they conducted their own internal investigation, attempting to determine how deeply the corruption had penetrated their operations and whether Michael had been an unwitting pawn or an active participant. The uncertainty about his professional future hung over him like a shadow, but he faced it with a resolve that made my heart swell with pride even as it ached with maternal concern. 10 days after the Westfield Manor confrontation, as the media frenzy showed no signs of abating, Michael arrived at my door with 2 suitcases and a haunted expression. "The press won't leave me alone at the condo," he explained, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "And it's full of reminders of everything. Would it be alright if I stayed here for a while? Just until things settle down?" Of course, I responded immediately, stepping aside to welcome him home in a way I hadn't been able to for years. "Your room is exactly as you left it." That wasn't entirely true. I had updated the bedding and curtains, replaced the ancient desk chair with something more supportive, added a small television. But the essence remained unchanged. The bookshelves still held his high school track trophies and dog-eared paperbacks. The walls still displayed his college diploma alongside photographs of camping trips with Richard. The closet still contained a few flannel shirts and worn jeans from before his wardrobe had transformed into exclusively tailored suits and designer labels. Michael stood in the doorway of his childhood bedroom, something shifting in his expression as he took in these physical reminders of who he had been before ambition and social climbing had reshaped his priorities. "I'd forgotten," he said softly, running his fingers along the spines of books he'd once loved: classic science fiction, historical biographies, philosophical treatises that had fascinated his developing mind. "All of this, it seems like it belonged to someone else." "Not someone else," I corrected gently. "Just an earlier version of you. One that's still there, beneath everything that's happened since." Those first days of cohabitation were awkward, both of us navigating the strange new reality of adult parent-child proximity after years of carefully managed distance. Michael maintained his outward composure through depositions and legal consultations, but at home, his defenses gradually lowered. I would find him sitting in Richard's old armchair, staring into space with an expression of such profound loss that it took every ounce of maternal restraint not to try to fix everything for him, to sweep away his pain with reassurances and distractions as I had when he was small. Instead, I gave him space while ensuring he knew I was available. I kept the refrigerator stocked with his favorite foods, maintained a pot of coffee ready each morning, and left the porch light on when legal meetings kept him out late. Small gestures of support that acknowledged his autonomy while affirming my presence. On the 5th night of his stay, the carefully constructed walls finally crumbled. I found him at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., surrounded by documents from his ongoing divorce proceedings, tears streaming down his face as he clutched the silver locket that rarely left his neck these days. Michael, I said softly, not wanting to startle him. What can I do? He looked up, making no attempt to hide his tears or compose his expression, a vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself to show me in years. I keep trying to pinpoint when it all went wrong, he said, voice rough with emotion. When I started becoming someone I don't recognize. Was it law school? The first time I met Vanessa? Or was the potential for this kind of moral compromise always there inside me? I settled into the chair beside him, considering his question with the seriousness it deserved. I don't think it's that simple, I said finally. We all contain contradictory potentials, for integrity and compromise, for courage and cowardice, for selflessness and self-interest. The question isn't whether those contradictions exist, but which ones we nurture through our choices. I nurtured the wrong ones, he said flatly. For a time, I acknowledged. But you're making different choices now, when it matters most. He gestured to the divorce papers, Vanessa's signature a flowing script at the bottom of the page that seemed to mock the disintegration of what it represented. 5 years of my life, he said quietly. 5 years building something that was apparently hollow from the start. How do I even begin to rebuild from this? The question wasn't rhetorical. He was genuinely seeking guidance, looking to me for wisdom in a way he hadn't since adolescence. I thought carefully before responding, wanting to honor both his pain and his capacity for growth. You start with honesty, I said finally. Not just in your testimony or legal proceedings, but with yourself. About what you truly value, what kind of life would actually feel meaningful to you, not what would impress others or advance your career, but what would allow you to recognize yourself in the mirror each morning. Michael considered this, his expression thoughtful despite the exhaustion evident in every line of his face. I'm not sure I know anymore. For so long, I've defined success by Vanessa's metrics, by the Winters family standards. I need to figure out what success means to me. Then that's where you start, I said simply. And you don't have to figure it all out tonight, or this week, or even this year. Rebuilding takes time. Your father used to say that anything worth building is worth building carefully, with attention to the foundation. The mention of Richard brought a small, sad smile to Michael's face. I wish he were here. He would have seen through the Winters family immediately. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But he also would have respected your right to make your own choices, even when he disagreed with them. That's the balance we always tried to maintain as parents, guiding without controlling, advising without demanding. I didn't make it easy these past few years, Michael admitted, shame coloring his voice. Parenthood isn't supposed to be easy, I replied with a small smile. If it were, everyone would excel at it. We sat together in companionable silence for a while, the late-night hour creating a cocoon of intimacy that had become rare between us. Finally, Michael gathered the divorce papers into a neat stack, physically and symbolically organizing one aspect of the chaos his life had become. I'm going to need a job, he said pragmatically. Once the firm's investigation concludes, I doubt they'll want me back, regardless of whether they determine I was actively complicit or merely oblivious. What kind of law did you actually enjoy practicing? I asked. Before it became about advancement and connections? The question seemed to surprise him, as if no one had asked about his genuine interests in a very long time. I like the pro bono work, he admitted after a thoughtful pause. Housing rights cases, immigrant advocacy. The work that Vanessa considered a necessary evil for resume building but that actually felt meaningful. Then perhaps that's a direction to explore, I suggested. Not immediately, you have enough on your plate with the federal case and divorce proceedings. But eventually, when you're ready to consider next steps. His voice dropped even lower. They want me to issue a public statement supporting their version of events. I studied my son's face, seeing the conflict raging behind his careful expression. And will you? Before he could answer, a chime announced dinner service. Michael squeezed my hand briefly. We'll talk more after, he promised. Just be prepared for anything tonight. We were seated according to formal place cards, with Michael at one end of the long table near Judge Winters, me near the middle between people I didn't know, and Vanessa at the opposite end surrounded by her closest friends. The physical separation was clearly intentional, limiting my ability to communicate with Michael during the meal. The dinner proceeded with surreal normalcy, elegant courses served by unobtrusive staff, polite conversation about safe topics, occasional laughter that sounded forced even to my untrained ear. No one mentioned the federal investigation, the impending indictments, or the collapse of the family's carefully constructed social facade. It was a masterclass in collective denial, in the power of wealth and privilege to create alternate realities. As dessert was being served, Judge Winters rose from his seat, commanding attention with the same authoritative presence that had likely served him well in the courtroom. Despite the federal charges hanging over him, he projected absolute confidence. The assurance of a man who had never faced serious consequences for his actions and didn't expect to start now. "Friends and family," he began, raising a crystal champagne flute. "Judith and I want to thank you for your support during this challenging time. As you know, we've been subjected to some unfortunate scrutiny regarding my judicial practices and our family's business activities." The understatement was so profound it bordered on absurdity. Federal indictments reduced to unfortunate scrutiny, corruption charges to questions about practices. "Tomorrow," he continued, "we will be holding a press conference to address these mischaracterizations directly. But tonight, we wanted to gather those closest to us, those who know our true character and values, to share our strategy and express our gratitude for your unwavering support." The speech continued in this vein, self-congratulatory, dismissive of serious allegations, confident in the power of social connections to overcome legal challenges. As he spoke, I watched Michael's expression grow increasingly strained, his fingers tightening around his water glass until I feared it might shatter in his grip. "And now," Judge Winters concluded, "I'd like to invite my son-in-law, Michael Blackwood, to say a few words about family loyalty in difficult times." All eyes turned to Michael, expectation heavy in the air. This, I realized, was why I had been invited, to witness Michael's public declaration of allegiance to the Winters family narrative, his final separation from the values Richard and I had instilled in him. Vanessa's expression was triumphant, certain of her husband's compliance after years of successful molding. Michael stood slowly, straightening his shoulders as he surveyed the gathered guests. His gaze found mine across the long table, and in that moment of connection, I saw his decision crystallize, saw the return of the son I had feared lost to ambition and social pressure. "Thank you, Judge Winters," he began, his voice steady, despite the tension evident in his posture. "You've asked me to speak about family loyalty, and I'm happy to do so." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the silver locket, holding it up so it caught the light from the chandeliers overhead. "This locket belonged to my grandmother, and her mother before that. My father gave it to my mother on their 10th anniversary as a symbol of enduring love and commitment. When he died 3 years ago, it became a physical reminder of the values he lived by: honesty, integrity, putting principle above personal advantage." A murmur of confusion rippled through the gathering. This was clearly not the supportive statement the Winters family had anticipated. "My mother gave me this locket before my wedding," Michael continued, his voice gaining strength. "She hoped it would remind me of where I came from, of the values that shaped me. I accepted it but didn't truly understand its significance, or perhaps I chose not to understand, because embracing those values would have required uncomfortable choices." Vanessa's expression had transformed from triumph to alarm. She made a small gesture, as if to interrupt, but Michael continued before she could speak. "Recently, I've been forced to confront some difficult truths about my marriage, my career, and the choices I've made over the past 5 years. I've discovered evidence that my professional advancement was orchestrated through judicial influence, rather than merit. I've learned that my wife was actively involved in facilitating potentially illegal communications between her father's court and law firms seeking favorable treatment. And most painfully, I've seen documentation that my marriage itself may have been a strategic arrangement with a predetermined end date." Gasps and murmurs swept through the room. Judge Winters half rose from his seat, his face flushing with anger, but Michael raised his voice slightly to maintain control of the moment. "I've provided all of this evidence to federal investigators," he announced, causing several guests to audibly inhale in shock. "I've given complete testimony about my own unwitting role in these activities. And tomorrow, I will be making a public statement that directly contradicts the narrative being presented at the Winters family press conference." The silence that followed was absolute, the collective holding of breath by people witnessing the collapse of carefully constructed social fiction. Vanessa's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup, while Judge Winters appeared on the verge of apoplexy. "Michael," Vanessa finally managed, her voice carrying a warning wrapped in forced pleasantness. "I think you've had too much to drink. Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately." "I'm perfectly sober, Vanessa," Michael replied evenly. "Probably more clear-headed than I've been in years. And this conversation needs to happen publicly, since that's how you've chosen to manage the situation, with elaborate dinners and press conferences rather than honest reckoning with your actions." He turned to address the stunned guests directly. "I apologize for involving you in what should be a private family matter. But since you've been gathered here to witness a performance of innocence and mutual support, I felt you deserved to hear the full truth before aligning yourselves with a narrative that federal prosecutors are already prepared to dismantle." Judge Winters finally found his voice, years of courtroom authority resonating in his tone. "That's enough, Michael. You're making accusations based on incomplete information and emotional distress. This behavior is inappropriate and potentially slanderous. Michael met his father-in-law's gaze steadily. I'm making statements based on evidence I've personally reviewed and provided to federal authorities. If you're concerned about slander, I suggest consulting with your defense attorneys rather than your social circle. With that, he turned to me, extending his hand across the intervening space. Mom, I think it's time we left. I rose immediately, heart pounding with equal parts anxiety and fierce pride. As I moved to join Michael, Vanessa stepped into my path, her composure cracking to reveal the calculation beneath. Eleanor, she said, voice low and urgent. Control your son. You have no idea the damage he's doing, to himself as much as to us. I looked at this woman who had systematically worked to separate me from my only child, who had viewed family relationships as strategic assets rather than sacred bonds, and felt a surprising wave of pity beneath my anger. My son doesn't need controlling, Vanessa, I replied quietly. He needs supporting, in becoming the man he was always meant to be, before ambition and social climbing distorted his vision. I stepped around her to join Michael, who took my arm with the confident courtesy his father had always displayed in social situations. Together, we walked toward the ballroom exit, leaving behind the stunned silence of Boston's elite confronting an unexpected disruption to their carefully ordered world. It wasn't until we reached the parking area that Michael's composure finally cracked. He leaned against my car, shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion, relief, grief, fear, all breaking through the dam of self-control he had maintained throughout the evening. I can't believe I just did that, he whispered. I placed my hand on his arm, feeling the tremors running through him. I can. Because beneath everything, the ambition, the social adaptation, the compromises, you are still Richard Blackwood's son. Still the boy we raised to recognize that integrity matters more than advantage, that truth matters more than comfort. Michael looked down at the locket still clutched in his hand, then carefully placed it around his own neck, not as jewelry, but as a tangible reminder of the values he was reclaiming. What happens now? He asked, echoing the question he had posed in my kitchen a week earlier, but with a different quality to his uncertainty, less devastation, more openness to possibility. Now, I said gently, we start rebuilding. Not your career or your social position, though those things may come in time. We start rebuilding your sense of self, your connection to what matters most. As we drove away from Westfield Manor, leaving behind the Winters family's elaborate performance of innocence, I glanced at my son's profile in the passenger seat. The investigation had apparently been underway for months, triggered by a whistleblower within the court system who had noticed patterns in the judge's rulings that correlated suspiciously with certain law firms' success rates. Vanessa's name began appearing in news reports by the third day, identified as a person of interest in the investigation. Financial records had revealed significant sums moving from law firms to consulting companies owned by Judith Winters, with suggestions that Vanessa had facilitated these arrangements. Michael remained unmentioned in most coverage, described vaguely as the husband or a junior partner at one of the implicated firms, when referenced at all. On the fourth day after Michael's visit, as I was preparing dinner, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young woman I didn't recognize, early 30s, conservatively dressed in a tailored suit, with the alert, assessing gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating situations quickly. Mrs. Blackwood, she inquired. My name is Rebecca Chen. I'm an assistant U.S. attorney working on the Winters investigation. May I come in? My heart pounded as I stepped aside to let her enter, my mind racing through possibilities. Was I under investigation as well? Had something happened to Michael? Is my son all right? I asked as I led her to the living room. As far as I know, yes, she replied, her tone professional but not unkind. I'm not here about Michael directly. I'm here about some documents that were delivered to you recently. I froze, suddenly understanding. The USB drive. Rebecca Chen nodded. Yes. We have reason to believe you received information relevant to our investigation, from a source we've been unable to identify. How did you know about that? I asked, though I suspected the answer even as the question left my lips. Michael brought copies of the documents to us yesterday, she explained. He said he obtained them from you, though he wasn't aware of their original source. The realization that Michael had voluntarily approached federal investigators, potentially implicating himself in the process, sent a surge of both pride and fear through me. It was exactly what Richard would have done, prioritizing truth and integrity over self-protection, but the potential consequences terrified me. Is he in trouble? I asked directly. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. That's still being determined. His cooperation is certainly being viewed favorably, particularly as he appears to have been unaware of the full extent of Judge Winters and Vanessa's activities. But I can't make any promises about immunity at this stage. I nodded, understanding the limitations of her position. What do you need from me? The original USB drive, if you still have it. And any information you might have about who sent it to you. I retrieved the drive from Richard's lockbox, explaining about the anonymous note that had accompanied it. I have no idea who sent it, I said truthfully. The note just mentioned being a concerned colleague. Rebecca bagged the drive carefully, making notes about its condition and the circumstances of its delivery. Mrs. Blackwood, she said as she prepared to leave, I shouldn't tell you this, but your son made quite an impression yesterday. He came forward voluntarily, provided evidence that implicated his wife and in-laws, and offered complete transparency about his own role, however unwitting, in their activities. That took considerable courage. The simple acknowledgement of Michael's integrity brought tears to my eyes. He's his father's son, I said quietly. When it matters most. After Rebecca left, I tried calling Michael repeatedly, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left messages expressing my pride in his decision to cooperate, my concern for his well-being, my availability whenever he needed support. The silence that followed was excruciating. I had no idea where he was, what he was facing, or how he was coping with the implosion of his marriage and career. 2 more days passed in this information vacuum, with news reports providing my only glimpses into the expanding scandal. Judge Winters had been formally indicted on multiple charges, including bribery, corruption, and obstruction of justice. Judith Winters had been named as a co-conspirator, with allegations that her charity boards had served as fronts for laundering payments from law firms seeking favorable treatment. Vanessa was described as cooperating with investigators, a phrase that suggested she might be negotiating some form of plea deal, potentially at the expense of others involved, including, possibly, Michael. On the 7th day after Michael's initial visit, I received a text message from an unknown number, Westfield Manor, 7 p.m. tonight. Formal family dinner. Vanessa insists you attend. Details to follow. Michael, the message was so cryptic. So unlike Michael's usual communication style, that I initially wondered if it was legitimate. But within minutes, a follow-up text arrived with an address and dress code information, followed by, not my idea. Will explain when I see you. Please come. Westfield Manor turned out to be an elegant historic estate on Boston's North Shore, now operated as a high-end event venue. As I drove through the imposing gates that evening, dressed in the most formal outfit I owned, a simple black dress purchased years earlier for a colleague's retirement dinner, I felt profoundly out of place. Luxury vehicles filled the circular driveway, Jaguars, Mercedes, BMWs, their gleaming surfaces reflecting the golden light spilling from the manor's many windows. A valet took my keys with only the faintest flicker of surprise at my modest sedan, and I made my way up marble steps to an entrance hall that could have comfortably housed my entire first floor. A staff member consulted a list, then directed me to the Oakwood ballroom, where the Winters Blackwood family gathering was being held. The scene that greeted me was surreal, a formal dinner for approximately 30 people, laid out with the kind of opulence I associated with period dramas rather than actual contemporary events. Crystal chandeliers illuminated a long table, set with fine china and silver, floral arrangements worthy of a royal wedding positioned at strategic intervals. The guests, already mingling with cocktails, were dressed in evening wear that likely cost more than my annual pension. I scanned the room for Michael, finally spotting him near a massive fireplace, engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with Vanessa. She looked immaculate as always, her designer gown and perfect makeup betraying no hint of the legal troubles threatening her freedom. When she saw me, she touched Michael's arm in a gesture that seemed both possessive and cautioning, then made her way toward me with the practiced smile I had come to distrust instinctively. Eleanor, she greeted me, air kissing near my cheek. I'm so pleased you could join us. The surreal normalcy of her greeting, as if we were attending a routine social function rather than gathering in the midst of a federal corruption investigation, left me momentarily speechless. What is this, Vanessa? I finally managed, gesturing to the elaborate gathering. Family support in difficult times, she replied smoothly. My parents thought it important that we present a united front before certain announcements are made public tomorrow. The calculated performance, the determination to maintain appearances even as their world collapsed, was both impressive and disturbing. I looked past her to where Judith and Harold Winters were holding court near the bar, accepting sympathetic murmurs from friends who apparently viewed federal indictments as unfortunate social inconveniences rather than serious legal matters. And Michael agreed to this performance? I asked skeptically. Something flashed in Vanessa's eyes, anger, perhaps, or frustration at having her narrative questioned. Michael understands the importance of family loyalty in times of crisis. Before I could respond, Michael appeared at my side, his expression tight with suppressed emotion. Mom, you made it. He kissed my cheek, then addressed his wife with careful formality. Vanessa, I need to speak with my mother privately. Before dinner is served. Vanessa's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. Of course, darling. Just remember what we discussed about presenting a unified perspective tonight. Michael guided me to a relatively quiet corner of the ballroom, his hand at my elbow trembling slightly. Up close, I could see the toll of the past week, new lines around his eyes, a pallor beneath his tan, the haunted look of someone operating on minimal sleep and maximum stress. I'm sorry about the cryptic message, he said quietly. This whole evening is Vanessa's idea, or more accurately, her parents'. They're announcing a strategic narrative tomorrow about the misunderstandings behind the federal investigation, and they wanted to rally family support beforehand. What kind of narrative? I asked, though I could imagine the approach: wealthy, privileged people reframing criminal behavior as simple misinterpretation of their good intentions. Michael's mouth twisted bitterly. The usual. Judge Winters was merely trying to create mentorship opportunities for promising young attorneys. Judith's consulting companies were legitimate businesses providing valuable services. Vanessa was an innocent intermediary with no understanding of any impropriety. He shook his head. It's all carefully constructed to minimize potential legal consequences while preserving as much of their social standing as possible. The conversation marked a turning point in Michael's healing process, the beginning of his active participation in rebuilding rather than simply reacting to the collapse of his carefully constructed life. Over the following weeks, as Judge Winters' trial date was set and plea negotiations for various conspirators intensified, Michael gradually reconnected with aspects of himself that had been dormant during his years in the Winters orbit. He began volunteering at the community legal aid clinic where Richard had contributed time throughout his career, offering guidance to people navigating housing disputes and benefit applications. The work was unglamorous and minimally compensated, but it reconnected Michael with the fundamental reason he had pursued law in the first place: to help people navigate complex systems that often seemed designed to disadvantage those with the fewest resources. These people have real problems, he told me after his third shift at the clinic. Not social embarrassments or career setbacks, but fundamental threats to their housing, their healthcare, their ability to remain with their families. It puts my situation in perspective. He also reconnected with old friends, people from before his Winters era whom he had gradually dropped as they failed to advance his social or professional position. People like Marcus Chen, his roommate from undergraduate days who now ran a small bookstore and community center in a transitioning neighborhood, and Sophia Washington, his study partner from first-year law courses who had chosen public defense work over corporate law despite its significantly lower prestige and compensation. They've welcomed me back without recrimination, Michael marveled after spending an evening with this reclaimed circle of friends. No interrogations about where I've been for 5 years, no judgment about the choices I made. Just genuine happiness. To reconnect. True friendship has a remarkable capacity for resilience, I observed. It can lie dormant for years and still flourish when properly tended. The media coverage eventually subsided as other scandals captured public attention, though the Winters corruption case continued to work its way through the legal system with methodical thoroughness. Judge Winters ultimately accepted a plea deal that included substantial prison time and forfeiture of illegally obtained assets, while Judith received probation and community service in exchange for her comprehensive cooperation with prosecutors. Vanessa's situation proved more complex. Her plea agreement acknowledged her role as intermediary while emphasizing her relative youth and the influence of her domineering parents. When the divorce was finalized, she reached out to Michael with a request to meet, for closure, according to her carefully worded email. Should I go? He asked me, conflict evident in his expression. Part of me never wants to see her again, but another part needs to understand, if any of it was real. If she ever actually loved me, or if I was just a project from the beginning. Only you can decide if that conversation would bring healing or reopen wounds, I replied. But if you do meet her, be prepared for the possibility that the truth isn't binary, that there may have been genuine feeling mixed with calculation, real connection alongside strategic positioning. He decided to meet her at a neutral location, a public garden near the courthouse where their divorce had been finalized. I waited anxiously at home, uncertain what emotional state might return from this encounter with the woman who had so profoundly shaped his life, for better and worse, over the past 5 years. When he returned, his expression was contemplative rather than devastated, suggesting that whatever had transpired hadn't reopened the deepest wounds. She apologized, he said as we sat on the back porch, the autumn air carrying hints of wood smoke from neighboring homes. Not a blanket, "I'm sorry for everything," but specific acknowledgments of ways she manipulated situations, isolated me from you, positioned our relationship to advance her family's interests. Did it seem genuine? I asked carefully. Michael considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had always been his natural inclination before ambition had accelerated his responses. Parts of it did, he said finally. She admitted that the marriage had been strategic initially, that her parents had identified me as someone with potential who could be shaped into a valuable asset. But she also said that genuine feelings developed over time, that she began to care for me as a person rather than just a career project. And do you believe her? He touched the locket absently, a gesture that had become habitual during moments of reflection. I believe she believes it, he said carefully. Whether those feelings were love or simply attachment to something she had invested in so heavily. I'm not sure that distinction matters anymore. What struck me most was the absence of bitterness in his voice, not forgiveness exactly, but a mature recognition of the complex human realities behind betrayal and manipulation. It was another sign of his healing, of his reconnection with the thoughtful, compassionate core that had been temporarily obscured but never fully erased by his years of ambition and social climbing. The most profound transformation, however, came through Michael's reconnection with his father's memory. One Saturday morning, I found him in the garage, sorting through boxes of Richard's belongings that I had carefully preserved but rarely examined, the memories they contained still tender even 3 years after his passing. I hope you don't mind, Michael said when he realized I was watching him from the doorway. I was looking for his journals, the ones he kept about his cases and volunteer work. Of course I don't mind, I assured him, moving to help lift a particularly heavy box from an upper shelf. These are your inheritance as much as mine. Together we unearthed Richard's collection of leather-bound journals, each meticulously dated and filled with his distinctive handwriting, observations about cases he had worked on, reflections on ethical dilemmas he had faced, notes about community needs he had identified through his volunteer work. Not the polished reflections of someone conscious of creating a legacy, but the honest wrestling of a man committed to living with integrity in a complex world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us. Then I put on a pot of coffee and waited for my son, wondering how much more his world would shatter before the day was through. Michael arrived 40 minutes later, looking like a man being hunted. His normally immaculate appearance had deteriorated. Tie askew, hair disheveled, eyes haunted with the 1,000-yard stare of someone witnessing the collapse of their carefully constructed reality. I ushered him inside quickly, away from potential prying eyes of neighbors. The weight of what I knew pressed against my conscience, demanding disclosure, but one look at my son's shattered expression told me he wasn't ready for additional revelations. They took everything, he said hoarsely, pacing my living room like a caged animal. Computers, files, phones. They questioned Vanessa for hours while I just watched. They wouldn't let me speak to her privately. Said it could be construed as witness tampering. I guided him to the kitchen table, placing a mug of coffee in his hands simply to give him something to hold on to. What are they saying she did, exactly? Michael stared into the dark liquid as if it might contain answers. They believe she was acting as an intermediary between her father and certain law firms, including mine. Communicating which cases he would be presiding over, suggesting strategies that would appeal to his preferences. He swallowed hard. They're calling it a conspiracy to corrupt judicial proceedings. And Vanessa? I asked carefully. What does she say? His laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. She says it's all a misunderstanding. That she was just being a supportive daughter and wife, trying to help everyone succeed. That there was nothing improper about family members discussing professional matters. The rationalization was so perfectly Vanessa, reshaping ethical breaches into virtuous family support, that I might have found it grimly amusing under different circumstances. What do you believe? I asked, the question that mattered most. Michael's hands tightened around the mug until his knuckles whitened. I don't know what to believe anymore. 3 hours ago, I had a successful career, a beautiful wife, and a secure future. Now federal agents are suggesting that my career advancement might have been orchestrated through judicial corruption, and my wife might have been the facilitator. The moment for truth had arrived, however painful. I couldn't withhold what I knew, not when it might help Michael make sense of the chaos engulfing him. Michael, there's something you need to see. I retrieved my laptop, opening the folder of documents I had copied from the mysterious USB drive. This arrived today, before the news about Judge Winters broke. I don't know who sent it, but I think you need to read it for yourself. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief as he scrolled through the emails between Vanessa and her parents, the financial records, the strategy documents outlining his career development. As if he were a product being positioned for market. When he reached the draft divorce papers, his face went completely blank, a defense mechanism against overwhelming emotional injury. "This can't be real," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Some part of him had already recognized the authenticity of what he was seeing, had perhaps suspected aspects of this manipulation without allowing himself to consciously acknowledge it. "I believe it is," I said gently. "Someone wanted us to know, what was happening." Michael continued reading in silence, each new document seeming to physically diminish him, shoulders curving inward as if to protect his vital organs from further assault. When he finally looked up, the pain in his eyes was almost unbearable to witness. "I've been a fool," he said, voice barely audible. "A complete and utter fool." I reached across the table to cover his hand with mine. "No. You've been a man who believed in the goodness of the woman he married, who trusted the institutions he served. There's no shame in that, Michael." "Isn't there?" he challenged, anger beginning to displace shock. "I've spent the last 5 years dismissing your concerns, treating your values as outdated, distancing myself from everything I was raised to believe in, all to chase success in a system that was apparently corrupted from the start." The self-recrimination in his voice broke my heart. "You made choices, yes. But you were also manipulated by people who have spent lifetimes perfecting the art of influence and control. The Winters family saw your potential, your fundamental decency. And they exploited it." Michael stood abruptly, resuming his agitated pacing. "What happens now? My career is likely over. No firm will touch me once this connection to judicial corruption becomes public. My marriage?" He gestured helplessly at the laptop screen, where Vanessa's divorce strategy remained visible. "Was any of it real? Did she ever actually love me?" That was the question I couldn't answer, the wound I couldn't heal. Whatever genuine feelings might have existed between Michael and Vanessa had been so thoroughly entangled with ambition and calculation that separating authentic emotion from strategic performance seemed impossible. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I do know that you are still the man your father and I raised you to be, somewhere beneath all of this. The man who values truth and integrity. The man who can rebuild from this, however painful the process might be." Michael paused by the window, staring out at the familiar neighborhood where he had grown up. "I don't even know where to start." "You start by remembering who you are," I said firmly. "Not your job title, not your address, not your connections. The essential Michael Blackwood, the compassionate boy who grew into a man with the capacity for remarkable integrity, when he chooses to exercise it." He turned to face me, vulnerability and uncertainty written across features that had become increasingly guarded over the years of his marriage. "How can you still have such faith in me, after how I've treated you? After I chose Vanessa and her family over you and Dad's memory?" The question pierced me, forcing me to articulate something I had always felt but rarely expressed so directly. "Because that's what unconditional love means, Michael. Not that I approve of every choice you make, but that my belief in your fundamental worth never wavers, regardless of those choices." For the first time since he'd arrived, something in his expression softened, a glimpse of the son I remembered, the young man who had approached life with open-hearted sincerity before ambition and social climbing had reshuffled his priorities. "I need to talk to Vanessa," he said after a long moment. "I need to hear from her directly whether any of this was real." I hesitated, torn between supporting his need for closure and protecting him from further manipulation. "Are you sure that's wise? Given the federal investigation, there may be legal implications to consider." "I don't care about legal implications right now," Michael replied, a hint of his father's steadfast determination showing through. "I need the truth, whatever it is, however painful. I've been living in a carefully constructed illusion for 5 years. I can't move forward until I understand what was real and what wasn't." I recognized the resolve in his voice, the same quiet determination Richard had shown when facing difficult situations. It was the first sign that the son I knew still existed beneath the polished exterior the Winters family had helped create. "Then you should talk to her," I agreed. "But Michael, be prepared for the possibility that the truth may be more complex and perhaps more painful than either complete deception or complete authenticity." He nodded, some of the initial shock giving way to a more focused intentionality. "I should go. There's a legal team waiting at a hotel downtown, the firm's crisis management response. I need to decide what I'm going to tell them." As he gathered himself to leave, I retrieved the silver locket from the coffee table where it had remained since his previous visit. "Take this with you," I said, pressing it into his palm. "Not as a burden or an obligation, but as a reminder of where you come from, of the strength and integrity that are your inheritance. regardless of what happens next. Michael stared down at the locket, emotions warring across his face. Then, in a gesture that surprised us both, he opened it, looking at his father's photograph for what might have been the first time in years. He would be so disappointed in me, he said softly. No, I corrected firmly. He would be disappointed in some of your choices, but never in you. There's a crucial difference. And he would be the first to tell you that it's never too late to reclaim your integrity, to realign your life with your deepest values. Michael closed the locket and slipped it into his pocket. I'll call you tomorrow, he promised. Once. I've spoken with Vanessa and sorted out the immediate legal concerns. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, emotions too complex to name washing through me in relentless waves. Vindication mingled with grief, hope with uncertainty. The Winters family's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, but the destruction would inevitably damage Michael as well, his career, his reputation, his sense of self. As his mother, I wanted to protect him from that pain, yet I also recognized that this collapse might be necessary for his authentic rebuilding. I didn't hear from Michael the next day, or the day after. The news was dominated by expanding coverage of Judge Winters' corruption scandal, with new details emerging hourly. Then I put on a pot of coffee and waited for my son, wondering how much more his world would shatter before the day was through. Michael arrived 40 minutes later, looking like a man being hunted. His normally immaculate appearance had deteriorated. Tie askew, hair disheveled, eyes haunted with the thousand-yard stare of someone witnessing the collapse of their carefully constructed reality. I ushered him inside quickly, away from potential prying eyes of neighbors. The weight of what I knew pressed against my conscience, demanding disclosure, but one look at my son's shattered expression told me he wasn't ready for additional revelations. They took everything, he said hoarsely, pacing my living room like a caged animal. Computers, files, phones. They questioned Vanessa for hours while I just watched. They wouldn't let me speak to her privately. Said it could be construed as witness tampering. I guided him to the kitchen table, placing a mug of coffee in his hands simply to give him something to hold on to. What are they saying she did, exactly? Michael stared into the dark liquid as if it might contain answers. They believe she was acting as an intermediary between her father and certain law firms, including mine. Communicating which cases he would be presiding over, suggesting strategies that would appeal to his preferences. He swallowed hard. They're calling it a conspiracy to corrupt judicial proceedings. And Vanessa? I asked carefully. What does she say? His laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. She says it's all a misunderstanding. That she was just being a supportive daughter and wife, trying to help everyone succeed. That there was nothing improper about family members discussing professional matters. The rationalization was so perfectly Vanessa, reshaping ethical breaches into virtuous family support, that I might have found it grimly amusing under different circumstances. What do you believe? I asked, the question that mattered most. Michael's hands tightened around the mug until his knuckles whitened. I don't know what to believe anymore. 3 hours ago, I had a successful career, a beautiful wife, and a secure future. Now federal agents are suggesting that my career advancement might have been orchestrated through judicial corruption, and my wife might have been the facilitator. The moment for truth had arrived, however painful. I couldn't withhold what I knew, not when it might help Michael make sense of the chaos engulfing him. Michael, there's something you need to see. I retrieved my laptop, opening the folder of documents I had copied from the mysterious USB drive. This arrived today, before the news about Judge Winters broke. I don't know who sent it, but I think you need to read it for yourself. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief as he scrolled through the emails between Vanessa and her parents, the financial records, the strategy documents outlining his career development. As if he were a product being positioned for market. When he reached the draft divorce papers, his face went completely blank, a defense mechanism against overwhelming emotional injury. This can't be real, he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Some part of him had already recognized the authenticity of what he was seeing, had perhaps suspected aspects of this manipulation without allowing himself to consciously acknowledge it. I believe it is, I said gently. Someone wanted me to know, wanted us to know, what was happening. Michael continued reading in silence, each new document seeming to physically diminish him, shoulders curving inward as if to protect his vital organs from further assault. When he finally looked up, the pain in his eyes was almost unbearable to witness. I've been a fool, he said, voice barely audible. A complete and utter fool. I reached across the table to cover his hand with mine. No. You've been a man who believed in the goodness of the woman he married, who trusted the institutions he served. There's no shame in that, Michael. Isn't there? He challenged, anger beginning to displace shock. I've spent the last 5 years dismissing your concerns, treating your values as outdated, distancing myself from everything I was raised to believe in, all to chase success in a system that was apparently corrupted from the start. The self-recrimination in his voice broke my heart. You made choices, yes. But you were also manipulated by people who have spent lifetimes perfecting the art of influence and control. The Winters family saw your potential, your fundamental decency, and they exploited it. Michael stood abruptly, resuming his agitated pacing. What happens now? My career is likely over. No firm will touch me once this connection to judicial corruption becomes public. My marriage? He gestured helplessly at the laptop screen, where Vanessa's divorce strategy remained visible. Was any of it real? Did she ever actually love me? That was the question I couldn't answer, the wound I couldn't heal. Whatever genuine feelings might have existed between Michael and Vanessa had been so thoroughly entangled with ambition and calculation that separating authentic emotion from strategic performance seemed impossible. I don't know, I admitted. But I do know that you are still the man your father and I raised you to be, somewhere beneath all of this. The man who values truth and integrity. The man who can rebuild from this, however painful the process might be. Michael paused by the window, staring out at the familiar neighborhood where he had grown up. I don't even know where to start. You start by remembering who you are, I said firmly. Not your job title, not your address, not your connections. The essential Michael Blackwood, the compassionate boy who grew into a man with the capacity for remarkable integrity when he chooses to exercise it. He turned to face me, vulnerability and uncertainty written across features that had become increasingly guarded over the years of his marriage. How can you still have such faith in me, after how I've treated you? After I chose Vanessa and her family over you in Dad's memory? The question pierced me, forcing me to articulate something I had always felt but rarely expressed so directly. Because that's what unconditional love means, Michael. Not that I approve of every choice you make, but that my belief in your fundamental worth never wavers, regardless of those choices. For the first time since he'd arrived, something in his expression softened, a glimpse of the son I remembered, the young man who had approached life with open-hearted sincerity before ambition and social climbing had reshuffled his priorities. I need to talk to Vanessa, he said after a long moment. I need to hear from her directly whether any of this was real. I hesitated, torn between supporting his need for closure and protecting him from further manipulation. Are you sure? That's wise? Given the federal investigation, there may be legal implications to consider. I don't care about legal implications right now, Michael replied, a hint of his father's steadfast determination showing through. I need the truth, whatever it is, however painful. I've been living in a carefully constructed illusion for 5 years. I can't move forward until I understand what was real and what wasn't. I recognized the resolve in his voice, the same quiet determination Richard had shown when facing difficult situations. It was the first sign that the son I knew still existed beneath the polished exterior the Winters family had helped create. Then you should talk to her, I agreed. But Michael, be prepared for the possibility that the truth may be more complex. And perhaps more painful than either complete deception or complete authenticity. He nodded, some of the initial shock giving way to a more focused intentionality. I should go. There's a legal team waiting at a hotel downtown, the firm's crisis management response. I need to decide what I'm going to tell them. As he gathered himself to leave, I retrieved the silver locket from the coffee table where it had remained since his previous visit. Take this with you, I said, pressing it into his palm. Not as a burden or an obligation, but as a reminder of where you come from, of the strength and integrity that are your inheritance, regardless of what happens next. Michael stared down at the locket, emotions warring across his face. Then, in a gesture that surprised us both, he opened it, looking at his father's photograph for what might have been the first time in years. He would be so disappointed in me, he said softly. No, I corrected firmly. He would be disappointed in some of your choices, but never in you. There's a crucial difference. And he would be the first to tell you that it's never too late to reclaim your integrity, to realign your life with your deepest values. Michael closed the locket and slipped it into his pocket. I'll call you tomorrow, he promised. Once. I've spoken with Vanessa and sorted out the immediate legal concerns. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, emotions too complex to name washing through me in relentless waves. Vindication mingled with grief, hope with uncertainty. The Winters family's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, but the destruction would inevitably damage Michael as well, his career, his reputation, his sense of self. As his mother, I wanted to protect him from that pain, yet I also recognized that this collapse might be necessary for his authentic rebuilding. I didn't hear from Michael the next day, or the day after. The news was dominated by expanding coverage of Judge Winters' corruption scandal, with new details emerging. Hourly. Judith's voice took on the patient tone of someone explaining complex matters to a child. Families like ours have certain expectations, certain ways of doing things that might seem calculated to outsiders but are simply how our world functions. Michael has been given extraordinary opportunities through his connection to our family. Families like yours? I repeated. Michael comes from a family with values and traditions of our own. That was my entire point at Castile. Judith waved her hand dismissively. Yes, and those humble beginnings are charming in their way. But surely you want what's best for your son? The connections Harold has facilitated, the doors Vanessa has opened, these are advantages most young attorneys would sacrifice anything to obtain. Including their integrity? Their sense of self? Their family relationships? Judith's expression hardened. Let's be practical, Eleanor. Michael is building a life that will provide security, influence, and opportunities that your late husband, devoted as he clearly was, could never have imagined for him. Is your pride truly worth jeopardizing all of that? The implicit threat hung in the air between us. I thought of the private investigator, of the black sedan watching my home, of the systematic way the Winters family had been separating Michael from his roots. What exactly are you asking me to do, Judith? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Simply to step back a bit. Give Michael and Vanessa space to build their life without complications. Perhaps consider relocating, I understand. Arizona has lovely retirement communities, and the climate would be much kinder to someone your age. The breathtaking audacity of her suggestion momentarily robbed me of speech. She wanted me to voluntarily exile myself from my son's life, to conveniently disappear so that the narrative Vanessa had constructed could continue without the inconvenient reminder of Michael's actual origins. And if I refused this generous suggestion? I finally managed, anger making my voice tremble slightly. Judith's smile was almost pitying. Then I'm afraid things might become rather difficult, for you, certainly, but more importantly for Michael. His position at the firm is promising but not yet secure. Harold's influence extends quite far in legal circles in the state. It would be a shame to see Michael's career opportunities narrow. The threat was as elegant as it was vicious. She was leveraging my love for my son against me, knowing I would sacrifice almost anything to protect his future. For a moment, I considered what she was proposing. Would moving away, becoming a distant figure in Michael's life, be worth it if it secured his professional success? Was that what a truly loving mother would do? I looked around my kitchen, at the faded marks on the doorframe where we had measured Michael's height every birthday, at the refrigerator still adorned with a magnet he had made in 5th grade, at the worn table where we had shared thousands of family meals. This wasn't just a house, it was the physical repository of our family's memories, the place where Michael had learned the values that made him the man I still believed he could be, despite recent evidence to the contrary. I think you should leave now, Judith, I said quietly. And you can tell Harold that if he continues to have me investigated, or if any attempt is made to interfere with my relationship with my son, I'll be pursuing legal action of my own. Starting with ethics complaints regarding the inappropriate leveraging of judicial influence for family advantage. It was a bluff. I had neither the resources nor the connections to effectively challenge a judge of Harold Winters' standing, but something in my expression must have conveyed absolute determination. Judith's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine surprise at my resistance. You're making a serious mistake, she said, gathering her designer handbag. For Michael's sake, I hope you reconsider. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table, trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. I had just declared war on one of the most influential families in Boston, with no real weapons at my disposal beyond the moral certainty that what they were doing to my son, and to our relationship, was wrong. That night, I finally received a text from Michael, "We need to talk. Coming by tomorrow afternoon." Those 7 words sent me into a frenzy of preparation, both emotional and physical. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, prepared his favorite cookies, and rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain my actions at Castile without retreating from the essential truth behind them. I laid the silver locket on the coffee table, a tangible reminder of the family bonds I was fighting to preserve. When Michael's car pulled into the driveway the following day, my heart raced with anticipation and fear. But when the passenger door opened and Vanessa emerged alongside my son, that hope curdled into apprehension. This would not be the reconciliation I had prayed for. They entered together, a united front. Michael looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from emotional conflict rather than physical exertion. Vanessa's expression was carefully neutral, her designer outfit and perfect makeup a stark contrast to my simple home. "Mom," Michael said, his voice formal in a way that broke my heart. "Thanks for seeing us." As if I would ever refuse to see my own child. As if we had become the kind of family that required appointments and formal thanks for basic connection. Of course, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. Would you like some coffee? I made your favorite cookies, the chocolate chip with walnuts. A flicker of something, memory, longing, regret, crossed Michael's face before Vanessa placed a hand on his arm, a subtle gesture of control that I had observed countless times before but now recognized with painful clarity. We can't stay long, she said. We have a commitment this evening. They sat stiffly on my worn sofa, declining refreshments. The silver locket lay between us on the coffee table, catching the afternoon light, an uninvited participant in this strained family meeting. Mom, Michael began, clearing his throat. About what happened at Castile. Michael, I started, but Vanessa smoothly interrupted. We thought it would be best if we all took some time to reflect on recent events, she said, her professional mediator voice in full effect. Emotions have been running high, and things have been said that were perhaps not intended. I meant every word I said, I replied quietly, looking directly at my son rather than his wife. And I suspect you know that, Michael. He shifted uncomfortably, unable to hold my gaze. Mom, you embarrassed me in front of colleagues and mentors. People who are crucial to my career. You implied that my marriage is somehow inauthentic. That's not what I said at all, I protested. I said that you seem to be losing yourself, forgetting the values that your father and I raised you with. See, this is exactly the problem, Vanessa interjected, her composure slipping slightly. To reveal the frustration beneath. You speak about values and heritage as though Michael's life before meeting me was the only authentic part of his existence. He's grown, Eleanor. He's built a successful career and marriage. Why can't you simply be happy for him instead of trying to drag him back to some idealized past? Because it's not about the past, I said, struggling to articulate the complex emotions churning within me. It's about who Michael is at his core, his compassion, his integrity, his ability to see people as human beings rather than social assets. Those aren't outdated values, they're the foundation of a meaningful life. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Richard that it made my chest ache. Mom, I'm still the same person. I've just evolved. Adapted to a different environment. Have you? I asked gently. When was the last time you volunteered at the homeless shelter? When was the last time you called Henry Wilson to check on him after his stroke? Henry had been Richard's best friend, a surrogate uncle to Michael throughout his childhood. When was the last time you made a decision that didn't calculate its impact on your career trajectory? Michael flinched. As though I'd struck him, and I immediately regretted the harshness of my words, if not their substance. That's unfair, Vanessa said, her voice cold. Michael works 60-hour weeks building a future for us, for our family. He doesn't have the luxury of spending weekends on charity projects or social calls. A future focused on what, exactly? I asked. More money? Higher status? Is that really what either of you thinks creates a meaningful life? Not everyone defines meaning through middle-class sentimentality, Vanessa snapped, her careful facade cracking. Some of us have ambitions beyond a small house in the suburbs and a mediocre career teaching high school English. The contempt in her voice confirmed everything I had suspected but hoped was merely my own insecurity. In Vanessa's worldview, my life, the life I had built with Richard, the values we had lived by and taught our son, was pathetically inadequate, an embarrassing chapter to be revised rather than honored. Michael placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. Vanessa, don't. But the damage was done. We stared at each other across my coffee table, the pretense of polite reconciliation abandoned. Well, I said finally, at least we're being honest. Now. Michael stood abruptly. This was a mistake. We should go. Gasps rippled through the room. Judith Winter's face had gone pale, while Vanessa's had flushed with anger. But it was Michael's expression that truly broke my heart, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension, then to shame as he began to recognize truths he had been avoiding. I heard you, I said directly to Judge Winters and his wife. In the hallway earlier. I heard how you view my son as a project, with rough edges from his public school background. I heard how you believe Vanessa has been managing my influence, as though loving a child for who he truly is were something to be overcome rather than cherished. The silence in the room was absolute now. Even the waitstaff had paused in their duties, sensing the seismic shift occurring in the family dynamic. Mom, please, Michael said, his voice strained. This isn't the place. Then where's the place, Michael? I asked, feeling tears threaten but refusing to let them fall. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you came to the house without Vanessa orchestrating the visit? When was the last time you made a decision based on the values your father and I taught you, rather than on what would advance your position in this world you now inhabit? I held the locket out toward him, its chain dangling from my fingers like a pendulum marking the passage of time, the distance that had grown between us. This is who you are, Michael. Not what's on your business card, not the address of your condo, not the connections you've made through marriage. You are Richard Blackwood's son, raised to believe that integrity matters more than influence, that family means supporting each other through difficulty rather than erasing the parts that don't fit a preferred narrative. Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I think you should leave, Eleanor. You're clearly upset and not thinking clearly. We can discuss this privately, as a family, when you're in a more rational state of mind. Her words, the practiced condescension, the subtle implication that my emotions rendered my observations invalid, crystallized everything that had been wrong about the past 5 years. In that moment, looking at my beautiful, accomplished daughter-in-law, I finally understood that she had never seen me as family at all. I was a problem to be managed, an obstacle to be navigated, a remnant of Michael's past that didn't align with the future she had planned. You're right about one thing, Vanessa, I said quietly. We should discuss this as a family. But I'm no longer certain what that word means to any of us anymore. I placed the locket on the table in front of Michael, the silver bright against the dark wood like a challenge, a question, a choice to be made. I love you, Michael. I always will. But I won't be silenced or managed or relegated to the footnotes of your life any longer. When you're ready to remember who you truly are, to honor the values your father and I raised you with, I'll be waiting. With that, I had turned and walked out of Castile, leaving behind the stunned silence of Boston's elite, a son torn between worlds, and a daughter-in-law whose carefully constructed plans had just encountered an unexpected variable, a mother who had finally found her voice. What I didn't know then, as I drove home in tears, was that my stand at Castile was only the beginning. That within weeks, I would discover exactly how far Vanessa was willing to go to protect the life she had designed. That a manila envelope would arrive on my doorstep containing information that would shake our family to its foundations. And that, despite Vanessa's warning that I should stay quiet for Michael's sake, I would find myself standing in the grand ballroom of Westfield Manor, reading divorce papers aloud to a roomful of people who had never truly seen my son for who he was, until that moment when truth became impossible to ignore. The elegant facade of my life cracked in the 2 weeks following the disastrous dinner at Castile. I moved through my daily routines in a fog of grief and uncertainty, checking my phone obsessively for calls or messages from Michael that never came. Each silent day carved another hollow space in my heart. The confrontation had breached something fundamental between us, and I oscillated between righteous certainty that I had done what was necessary and crushing guilt that I had publicly humiliated my only child. My closest friend Meredith tried her best to provide comfort, bringing casseroles I couldn't eat and reassurances I couldn't believe. He'll come around, Eleanor, she insisted as we sat in my small kitchen, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the worn linoleum. Once he's had time to think about what you said, he'll understand you were protecting him. But as days stretched into weeks with no word from Michael, even Meredith's optimism began to waver. Maybe you should reach out first, she suggested. Gently. Pride has no place in family healing. I considered her advice seriously, drafting dozens of text messages and emails that I never sent. What could I say that wouldn't sound like a retreat, an admission that standing up for our family's values had been a mistake? And yet, the silence between us was becoming its own kind of prison. It was during this limbo of uncertainty that I first noticed the black sedan parked across from my house. For 3 consecutive days, it appeared in the morning and remained until evening, its tinted windows revealing nothing about its occupant. On the 4th day, I marched across the street, determined to confront whoever was watching my home, only to have the car pull away smoothly before I could reach it. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. Mrs. Blackwood, a man's voice inquired, professional but with an undercurrent of discomfort. Yes? Who's speaking? My name is Thomas Reed. I'm a private investigator hired by Winters and Associates Legal Group. The chill that ran through me had nothing to do with the autumn air seeping through my windows. Judge Winters' firm? Yes, ma'am. I've been instructed to investigate certain aspects of your personal and financial history. The implications struck me like physical blows. On what grounds? For what purpose? The investigator's pause spoke volumes. I'm not at liberty to discuss my client's intentions. I simply wanted to inform you of the investigation as a professional courtesy. My firm prides itself on ethical practices. After hanging up, I sat in my darkened living room, Richard's photograph in the locket seeming to watch me with concern from the coffee table where I'd placed it after returning from Castile. The Winters family was investigating me, digging into my life for what could only be ammunition to use against me in some capacity. The realization both terrified and infuriated me. The next morning, I called the only lawyer I knew personally, Martin Abernathy, who had handled Richard's modest estate after his passing. His response to my situation was grave. "This is concerning Eleanor," he said, the creak of his office chair audible through the phone. "Private investigators are typically employed in anticipation of litigation or to gather leverage for negotiations. Have there been any discussions about limiting your access to Michael or any financial matters involving your son?" "No, nothing like that," I replied, though a knot of dread was forming in my stomach. "At least, not that I'm aware of." "I'll make some discreet inquiries," Martin promised. "In the meantime, be extraordinarily careful about what you say to anyone connected to the Winters family. Document any unusual interactions, and forward any written communications directly to me." His caution proved prescient. 3 days later, I returned from grocery shopping to find Judith Winters sitting in her luxury SUV in my driveway. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I parked along the curb, steeling myself for whatever this unexpected visit might bring. Judith emerged from her vehicle with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to making entrances. Her camel hair coat probably cost more than 3 months of my pension, and her smile contained all the warmth of a February morning. "Eleanor," she called, as though we were old friends meeting by chance. "I was hoping to catch you at home." "This is a surprise," I replied, deliberately not making it sound like a pleasant one as I gathered my grocery bags from the trunk. "Let me help you with those," she offered, reaching for a bag in a gesture that would have seemed generous if not for the calculation evident in her eyes. Inside my kitchen, Judith surveyed my modest home with the same subtle distaste Vanessa had always displayed, though she was skilled enough to mask it behind social pleasantries. "What a charming space," she said, in the tone one might use to describe a quaint but primitive historical exhibit. "So authentic." I placed my groceries on the counter and turned to face her directly. "I doubt you came all this way to critique my decorating, Judith. Why are you here?" Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Always refreshingly direct, aren't you, Eleanor? It's actually one of the qualities I've always appreciated about you, even if your timing sometimes leaves something to be desired." I waited silently, refusing to be drawn into her carefully choreographed conversational dance. Judith sighed, abandoning some of her rehearsed approach. "I'm here about Michael, of course. And about the unfortunate scene at Castile." "You mean when I objected to your husband and you discussing my son as though he were a social acquisition with embarrassing origins?" I kept my voice steady, though my hands had clenched into fists at my sides. "Eleanor." The maitre d' had given my outfit a subtle but assessing glance before leading me to the private dining room where the celebration was already underway. Vanessa's expression upon seeing me walk through the door had been a masterclass in concealed displeasure, a momentary tightening around the eyes, a fraction of a second's pause in her social smile, then a recovery so smooth that anyone who didn't know her well would have missed it entirely. "Eleanor. What a surprise," she'd exclaimed, air kissing my cheek. "We weren't expecting you quite so early. The family portion of the evening isn't scheduled to begin for another hour." The message was clear. I had arrived during the important part of the celebration, the networking portion where Michael's career advancement was being leveraged for maximum social and professional advantage. The family portion was an afterthought, a perfunctory acknowledgement of personal relationships that were secondary to business connections. Judge Winters had nodded to me with the benign condescension he always displayed, while Judith had offered a brittle smile and immediately turned back to her conversation with a silver-haired man I recognized as the state attorney general. Michael had hurried over, conflict evident in his expression, genuine pleasure at seeing me warring with anxiety about how my presence might affect the carefully choreographed evening. "Mom, you look great," he'd said, giving me a quick hug. "Let me introduce you to some people." But as he'd guided me around the room, the pattern quickly became clear. I was being introduced selectively to less influential guests, while Vanessa smoothly intercepted any approach toward the power brokers in the room. My son was being guided through his professional connections like a prize racehorse, with Vanessa as his handler, determining which relationships were valuable and which were not. I had settled into a chair at the edge of the gathering, nursing a glass of wine I couldn't comfortably afford and watching my son navigate this world that seemed increasingly foreign to the values Richard and I had instilled in him. The silver locket felt heavy against my chest, a tangible reminder of everything that was being lost in this transition. Dinner had been a 7-course affair that felt more like a business meeting than a family celebration. I was seated far from Michael, between a junior associate from his firm and an elderly aunt of Vanessa's who spent most of the meal complaining about her domestic staff. From my position, I could see Vanessa leaning close to Michael at the head table, her hand possessively on his arm as she facilitated conversations with the influential guests seated around them. It was during the dessert course that I overheard a conversation that changed everything. I had excused myself to use the restroom, and on my return, I paused in the hallway outside the private dining room, taking a moment to compose myself before re-entering an environment where I felt increasingly out of place. Quite a coup for Michael, a man's voice had said from just inside the door, Judge Winters, speaking to someone in low tones. Harrison and Palmer doesn't make junior partners without serious consideration. Harold, let's be honest, a woman, had replied, Judith's distinctive cadence unmistakable. Your call to Douglas Harrison didn't hurt. And Vanessa's been positioning Michael beautifully. That Sullivan acquisition was handed to him because of your connections. The boy has potential, Judge Winters had responded. A bit rough around the edges still, that public school background shows sometimes, but Vanessa's doing an admirable job of polishing him up. The Robertson girl would have been a more natural fit, of course, but Vanessa was determined. Well, she always did enjoy a project, Judith had laughed lightly. And he's proven surprisingly malleable. That mother of his could have been problematic, all those middle-class values and that embarrassing sentimentality, but Vanessa's managed to minimize her influence quite effectively. Speaking of which, Judge Winters had murmured, is that her by the restrooms? Perhaps we should. I had turned and walked quickly away, my cheeks burning with humiliation and anger. In the sanctuary of the elegant restroom, I'd stared at my reflection, a woman I barely recognized anymore, dressed in clothes chosen to please people who saw me as an embarrassment, an obstacle to be managed. My fingers had found the silver locket, the cool metal, a connection to a past that suddenly seemed very distant. I had opened it, looking at Richard's kind face, trying to imagine what he would say if he could see what was happening to our family, to the son we had raised together. They're erasing us, Richard, I'd whispered to his photograph. They're erasing everything we built, everything we believed in. In that moment of clarity, something had shifted inside me. The hurt and confusion that had characterized the past years crystallized into a clear understanding. I had been complicit in my own erasure, in the gradual dismantling of my relationship with my son. By remaining silent, by accepting the subtle humiliations and exclusions, I had tacitly endorsed Vanessa's reconstruction of Michael's life and values. When I returned to the dining room, I saw everything with new eyes. The practiced smiles, the strategic conversations, the careful positioning, it was all part of an elaborate performance in which authenticity had no place. And in the center of it all was my son, beaming with pride but somehow diminished, a supporting actor in a production directed by the Winters family with Vanessa as their proxy. As the evening drew to a close, toasts were proposed. Judge Winters spoke eloquently about Michael's promising future, making no mention of his past or the values that had shaped him before entering the Winters orbit. Vanessa's toast was a masterpiece of subtle self-congratulation, positioning herself as the architect of Michael's success while emphasizing the importance of the connections her family had facilitated. When it came time for family members to speak, I rose from my seat, ignoring Vanessa's barely concealed look of alarm. I felt a strange calm as I lifted my glass, the silver locket warm against my skin like a talisman. I'd like to say a few words about my son, I began. Vanessa leaned toward Michael, whispering something that made him look at me with sudden concern. Michael wasn't always destined for corner offices and partnerships, I continued, my voice steady despite the rising tension I could feel emanating from the head table. He was once a little boy who cried when he found injured birds, who saved his allowance to buy Christmas gifts for less fortunate classmates, who spent weekends helping his father build homes with Habitat for Humanity. I could see Michael's expression shifting, embarrassment giving way to something more complex as memories surfaced. Vanessa's face had hardened into a mask of barely controlled displeasure. Eleanor, she called across the table, her voice carrying a warning wrapped in false brightness, perhaps we should keep the childhood stories for a more intimate gathering? I'm sure the Attorney General doesn't need to hear about Michael's Cub Scout adventures. The dismissal was so casual, so practiced, that I almost yielded to it out of habit. But the locket seemed to pulse against my skin, and Richard's voice echoed in my memory, stand for what matters, Ellie. Always stand for what matters. Actually, Vanessa, I replied, my smile unwavering, I think it's important for everyone here to know the man Michael truly is, not just the lawyer he's become. The values that shaped him, the family history that made him who he is. I turned back to the gathered guests, many of whom were watching the exchange with the avid interest of audiences who sense unfolding drama. My late husband Richard used to say that success isn't measured by titles or bank accounts, but by the lives you touch and the integrity you maintain. He taught Michael that true wealth comes from knowing who you are and standing firm in your values, even when it's difficult. I unclasped the locket from around my neck, holding it up so the silver caught the light from the elegant chandeliers overhead. This locket has been passed down through generations of our family. It represents our belief that love and loyalty endure beyond circumstances, beyond status, beyond death itself. It was meant to be a welcome gift to Vanessa when she joined our family, a symbol that she was becoming part of something with deep roots and meaningful traditions. Vanessa's composed facade cracked slightly, her eyes darting to Michael, with a look that demanded intervention. "Mom," Michael said, rising from his seat, "maybe this isn't the right moment for." "It's exactly the right moment, Michael," I interrupted gently. "Because I think you've forgotten who you are. And I've been silent for too long, watching you become someone your father wouldn't recognize." The room had gone completely still, the polite social mask slipping as genuine emotion, discomfort, fascination, secondhand embarrassment, rippled through the gathered guests. "Eleanor," Judge Winters said, his authoritative courtroom voice designed to intimidate, "I think that's quite enough. You're embarrassing yourself and, more importantly, embarrassing Michael on what should be a proud evening for him." I met his gaze steadily. "With all due respect, Judge Winters, I'm not the one who should be embarrassed. I'm not the one who's been systematically separating a son from his heritage, treating his mother as an inconvenience to be managed, or discussing him as though he were a social acquisition rather than a human being with his own history and values. Stop bringing Dad into this." Michael's voice rose with sudden anger. "He's not here, Mom. He's been gone for 3 years, and you're still acting like his opinion is the only one that matters." The words struck like a physical blow. "That's not true," I whispered, though I immediately questioned whether it was. Had I been using Richard's memory as a shield, as a way to avoid acknowledging how life, including Michael's, had inevitably changed after his death? "It is true," Michael continued, his composure crumbling. "You've been holding on to Dad, to this house, to who I was at 18, refusing to accept that things change, that I've changed." "Change isn't the problem," I said, fighting back tears. "Everyone changes. But there's a difference between growth and abandonment, Michael. You haven't just evolved, you've been systematically erasing your past, as though your life before the Winters family was something shameful." Vanessa moved to Michael's side, physically positioning herself between us, a gesture so symbolic it would have been laughable if it weren't so heartbreaking. "I think we've said enough for today," she announced with finality. "This isn't productive for anyone." "Vanessa," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, "I'd like a moment alone with my son." Her eyebrows rose in genuine shock at the request. She turned to Michael, clearly expecting him to refuse. For a moment, he seemed frozen between us, torn between the woman who had raised him and the woman who was reshaping him. "5 minutes," he said finally. "I'll meet you in the car, Vanessa." Her expression flickered between disbelief and calculation before settling into resigned compliance. 5 minutes, she agreed, gathering her purse. "Then we really do need to leave for the Harrington event." The moment the front door closed behind her, something shifted in the atmosphere. Michael's shoulders slumped slightly, the performance of perfect professional poise temporarily abandoned. "She's not the villain you think she is, Mom," he said quietly. "She wants what's best for me, for us." "I believe she thinks she does," I replied carefully. "But Michael, best according to whose definition? Whose values? Whose vision of a worthwhile life?" He sighed heavily, suddenly looking very young despite his expensive suit and carefully groomed appearance. "Why does it have to be a competition? Why can't I honor what you and Dad taught me while also building a different kind of life?" It was a fair question, one that forced me to examine my own rigidity, my own difficulty in accepting that my son was an adult entitled to make choices different from those Richard and I had made. "It doesn't have to be a competition," I acknowledged. "But it does require honesty, Michael. And respect for the past that shaped you, even as you move toward a different future." I picked up the silver locket from the coffee table, holding it out to him. "This isn't just a piece of jewelry. It's a reminder that we are shaped by those who loved us, by the values they lived by. Your father was the most honest man I've ever known. He taught you that integrity matters more than advantage, that how you achieve matters as much as what you achieve." Michael stared at the locket, conflict evident in his expression. "Mom, I can't. I'm not asking you to wear it," I said with a small smile. "I'm asking you to remember what it represents. To consider whether the path you're on honors the best parts of yourself, the parts that have nothing to do with status or connections or career advancement." His phone buzzed insistently, Vanessa, no doubt, monitoring even these few minutes of privacy. Michael glanced at it, then back at me, torn between worlds. "I have to go," he said, but he reached out and briefly closed his hand around the locket, a gesture that felt like the first genuine connection we'd had in months. "But I hear you, Mom. I really do." After they left, I sat in my quiet living room, trying to determine whether anything had actually been resolved. Michael had. acknowledged my concerns, had seemed genuinely conflicted about the direction his life had taken. But Vanessa's influence remained powerful, and the Winters family's resources for enforcing their vision of Michael's future far outstripped my own. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that my conversation with Michael had planted a seed of doubt that would grow in the coming weeks, leading him to question aspects of his marriage and career that he had previously accepted without examination. And I certainly couldn't have anticipated the manila envelope that would arrive on my doorstep 3 days later, changing everything. The envelope bore no return address, just my name typed on a plain white label. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note on expensive stationery. Mrs. Blackwood, I believe you should have this information. What you do with it is your choice, but I thought you deserved to know. A concerned colleague. I stared at the cryptic message, turning the USB drive over in my hands with a growing sense of foreboding. Whatever information it contained, someone had taken significant risk to provide it to me. The handwriting was precise, educated, a professional person, someone accustomed to documentation and detail. My ancient laptop protested as I inserted the drive, waiting anxiously as it recognized the new hardware. A single folder appeared, labeled simply Winters. Inside were dozens of files, emails, financial records, legal documents, all meticulously organized and annotated. As I began to read, the blood drained from my face. There, in cold digital type, was evidence of what I had only suspected. A coordinated campaign by Harold and Judith Winters, executed primarily through Vanessa, to separate Michael from his past and remake him in their image. Email exchanges between Vanessa and her parents detailed strategies for limiting my influence, for positioning certain career opportunities in ways that would further entangle Michael in obligations to the Winters family, for gradually reshaping his values and priorities. But far more disturbing were the documents related to Michael's career advancement. Evidence of Judge Winters using his influence to secure favorable rulings in cases handled by Michael's firm. Records of conversations suggesting that Michael had been deliberately kept unaware of ethical compromises made on his behalf. And most damning of all, draft divorce papers prepared by Vanessa's personal attorney, outlining a strategy for separating from Michael once partnership is secured, in a way that would maximize financial settlement while minimizing professional disruption. Vanessa had been planning to divorce my son once he achieved partner status, using the connections and position she had helped him attain to secure a substantial settlement for herself. The marriage that I had worried was changing Michael had apparently been, from Vanessa's perspective, a strategic alliance with a predetermined expiration date. I sat in stunned silence, the implications overwhelming me. Should I show these documents to Michael? Would he even believe me, or would he see it as another attempt to separate him from Vanessa? And who had sent them? The note mentioned a concerned colleague, someone from Michael's firm? Someone who had witnessed the manipulation firsthand and developed their own ethical concerns? I was still grappling with these questions when my phone rang. Meredith, calling with an urgency unusual for her typically calm demeanor. Eleanor, are you watching the news? She demanded without preamble. No, I've been occupied with something else. What's happening? It's Judge Winters. He's been arrested, something about judicial misconduct, accepting bribes to influence case outcomes. It's all over the local stations. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the information connected with the documents I had just been reviewing. When did this happen? About an hour ago. They took him out of the courthouse in handcuffs. Eleanor, isn't he Michael's father-in-law? Yes, I said faintly. Yes, he is. After hanging up, I turned on the television to find every local channel covering the developing scandal. Judge Harold Winters, respected jurist and pillar of Boston society, had been arrested following a 6-month federal investigation into corruption within the state's judicial system. The reporters were careful in their language, emphasizing alleged misconduct and accusations of impropriety, but the footage of the distinguished judge being escorted from the courthouse by federal agents spoke volumes. As I watched the coverage unfold, my phone lit up with another incoming call, Michael's number. With trembling fingers, I answered. Mom, his voice was strained almost beyond recognition. Have you seen the news? I just turned it on. Michael, are you all right? A harsh laugh that contained no humor. No, I'm not all right. The FBI just raided our condo. They're taking Vanessa's laptop, files, they've got a warrant related to her communications with her father about cases before his court, including cases my firm was handling. My heart raced with equal parts vindication and terror. Michael, not on the phone, he cut me off. I don't know who might be listening. Can I come over? Now? Of course, I said immediately. I'll be waiting. As I hung up, I looked down at the USB drive still plugged into my laptop, at the damning evidence it contained, evidence that now seemed to be part of a much larger, more public scandal than I could have imagined. Whoever had sent me these files had known what was coming, had wanted me to have this information before the story broke. I quickly copied the files to my laptop and removed the USB drive, hiding it in the small lockbox where I kept Richard's important papers.